Okay, next up we have the National Weather Service, our headline presentation. Clinton Rockey will be giving this year. It's his first time here, so we welcome Clinton. He's also an Oregon AMS member and has been a forecaster with the National Weather Service office for over 18 years. Growing up in Kansas, where he experienced a wide range of weather, his love for weather was not too difficult to cultivate. While attending the University of Kansas, he interned at the NOAA Storm Prediction Center and the Aviation Weather Center. After graduating in 1994, he began his career with the National Weather Service in Eugene. Shortly afterwards, Clinton was transferred to the Portland office, where he has been an active in aviation and climate services. When asked what his favorite weather phenomena was, he quickly responded with dense fog. Why is this? Well, Clinton says it's just so relaxing and leaves much to the imagination when trying to discern objects in the fog. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Portland office of the National Weather Service, Mr. Clinton Rockey.
Excellent. So everyone here, I understand everyone here is actually wanting snow, not fog, is that right? I came to the wrong conference. Momentarily. Well, we're going to start with a few slides. I don't have as many as Mark had, but hopefully I'll have some that may be more encouraging for snow this year. We shall see. Just kind of, we're going to go back a little bit in time, kind of look at typically what we would see on average for typical patterns of El Nino and La Nina. Now, we're not looking at those patterns this year, fortunately, but we've had them in the past. A couple of great shots here we found a while back. One from the great El Nino of '97. What stands out in here, and I don't know, can you see the mouse on the screen?
Hey Clinton, a couple people are asking if you could hold the mic a little closer.
Which one's this one?
Yeah, just pull it off of that, if you're comfortable.
How's that? Oh, I can even hear myself. The '97 El Nino. What's interesting about that, we've often talked about the warm tropical waters that feeds the weather patterns, and you can see that off of the west coast of Central America and South America. Then we get the La Ninas, and I pointed out the '99 one because it was quite impressive. Look at the difference between surface temperatures off the west coast of South America and Central America. Big changes. And those have direct major impacts for our weather patterns up in the north. What happens in the weather patterns of the northern areas? Left side sees an El Nino pattern. Typically, we see a fairly strong jet aimed at southern parts of the United States that drags the storm track to our south and gives California the great weather that they see during those periods, the Malibu floods, the great snowpacks, and Sierras. Let's talk with a gentleman yesterday from Newport, and I felt really sad for him. He lived and grew up in Southern California. His job has now transferred him to Newport. He was worried all day. We spent probably 15 minutes on the phone trying to allay his fears about the big wind that's coming this week. We told him 40, 50 mile an hour wind gust out from the beaches. The guy you thought was having conniptions. He was just worried to death that he was going to have to build shelters and was talking about hurricane force. He's going to call again this afternoon while I'm on shift, I'm sure. La Nina patterns, typically that jet stream shifts back to the north, and so we get our classic wet winters up in the north. Southern parts of the United States tend to go back more dry. What's unique in both of these patterns is the jet stream of the polar. Predominantly favors those big cold snaps back across the eastern half of the United States, especially as we get in the La Nina periods. And what I wanted to point out about that is notice how far to the southwest they get. The farther we get that polar jet back to the southwest over the Rockies, the better the threat is for us getting those cold east winds out of the gorge, which will help us for snow. And we're going to talk about in a few moments whether or not we'll see that or not this year. Precipitation, temperatures, again, El Nino is going to be on the right-hand graphic, precipitation on the left. Notice the changes. And we'll zoom in on the northwest here in a moment. The overall pattern, you see that El Nino is warm in the northwest, cooler in the southern track, and that makes sense. That's where the rain and cloud track and clouds and storms are. Let's zoom in a little closer to the northwest. La Nina on the left side for precipitation is on the bottom. El Nino on the right. Notice the Pacific Northwest rainfall rates. Do you see a big difference? Not really. The green showing way above normal rainfalls. So in either way, either we go to the extreme for the warmth, extreme to the right for cold, it doesn't matter. Precipitation typically, those two patterns are going to produce some fairly wet weather along the coastline. It's just a matter of whether it can get to the Cascades or not. And notice in the La Niñas, left side, the Cascades get great snows, El Niños, not quite so much. In fact, they're drier than usual. So, currently this year, we're in what we call the neutral period. There's no strong signal for either an El Niño or a La Niña period. So those graphs we just saw, we'll put them away, hold them out for maybe next year or the year after when those patterns return. What we are going to see this year is a pattern similar to the right-hand graphic here. Our jet is still going to favor cold out snaps across the eastern half of the United States. Boston, New York, Chicago, maybe they'll get those great snows they saw a few years ago. What stands out for us is what I'm afraid Mark just said a little bit ago. Remember those snooze fests? Warm weather over the southern United States, not so much in the north. There's really no big signature for either wet or cold up here in the north for us. So again, neutral conditions, and we're going to see those continuing next year. Just kind of quickly showing you what the surface and the sea surface temperatures are of the tropics along the equatorial areas from South America westward. Really, no big, nothing really stands out. Temperatures in those areas did rise a little bit, so early on in the summertime we thought maybe we could get into what we call a moderate or a weak El Nino period this winter. Since that, however, those temperatures kind of stabilized. Now we're thinking for the most part, we're not going to see an El Nino develop. We're just going to be looking at kind of the status quo, quasi-neutral, just nondescript for the most part. Does that mean we're going to have that for our weather? We're getting there. Here's the long-range forecast for those outlooks for the neutral or El Nino periods, the sea surface temperatures, and no big changes. Status quo. We're going to develop that neutral period. We're going to stay in that cycle right on into the springtime. So with that in mind, here's what NOAA is basically looking at for the next 90 days. Pattern is such that we're going to favor cooler weather over the northern tier states of Great Lakes, maybe into southern Florida and along the Gulf of Alaska area. Makes sense over Gulf of Alaska. Typically, it's a big storming area. You don't need a lot of cold air or cloud cover to keep those temperatures down. But what's of more interest is for us is what's happening in the west. Warmer than usual temperatures over the southwest, expanding back up into the northern Great Basin into the Pacific Northwest. Precipitation-wise, we're favoring a drier than usual. And I think what's happening with the pattern like it is, we'll probably see more offshore flow events developing this winter. This would indicate that we're going to have more of a persistent high developing over the Rocky Mountains back in the Central Plains. When we get those kind of patterns, we typically get mild weather over the western U.S., colder air back in the east. It also allows those cold fronts that are coming down the northern plains to back into Montana. How many of you have been up in eastern Washington and eastern Oregon during the winter months? What do you like to see out there? What's the number one thing you seem to see out there during those times?
Blue sky.
Weather-wise. Clear skies, someone said. And that basin fog, which we saw the last few days. I suspect that's the pattern we're going to see. And if that happens, what we saw yesterday, those easterly winds kicking up, we may see those quite a bit this winter. So we look back at precipitation for Portland. I pointed out on the arrows a couple of things to look at here. These colors, hopefully they'll show up, but the right-hand column for each month, this is January through December. I'll give you an example, this green is what we call the INSO neutral periods. That's what we're going to be in this year. Notice that this is for monthly rainfall. October, a little below the usual pattern because the left side, I should point this out, you may not see this, but this left column is an average rainfall for each month. We want to compare the left with the right. Not a big difference for the fall and going into December. But as we get into January, and especially in February, what do you see happening by February? Does it get a lot more or a lot less than normal? A lot more. So there's some indications that with a neutral period like we've seen this year, we may start off with near average rainfall for the first half of winter, but we'll see what happens. We may have one of those nice February events would give us some heavy rains. Now I did this yesterday, kind of going back and looking at what I like to call the warm neutral years. And that's where we stay not in the cold La Nina period, but we're kind of real weak El Nino signal, but not strong enough to call it El Nino. This graphic shows us precipitation departure from average for the winter rainfall. Portland, Salem, Eugene, and Astoria. At the top is the average rainfall during that period. Blue stands out real nice. Can you guess what kind of winters those are? How many say those are El Nino winters?
La Niña.
Of course, I said in this graphic, unfortunately. Those are La Nina winters. So definitely, you see the signal there shows up for those. But look at the warm neutral ones, the yellow bands. They tend to be slightly drier than usual for just about everywhere here in the Pacific Northwest. So that gives me some indication there's not a real strong confidence, and we're only talking, what, an inch below normal for that period? That's not a lot. One shower parked over you in March, and you blow those odds right off the map. They're not strong enough signal to say we're going to have really dry or really wet. Well, we can't say we're not going to be really wet. So we're looking, for the most part, typical rain average for this winter coming up. Another fellow forecaster at our office, we worked on this week as well, looking at how many times did we have flood events based on the El Nino signal. Red box is the neutral period. Notice they're kind of all over, no big distributions for the most part, and we're looking at just all the flood events across Northwest Oregon. But when we look at the major flood events, and these are where we have a lot of our rivers going into major flooding, do they favor the neutral period? Do they favor El Nino? They favor La Nina. So no big news, no surprises there. Basically, with those normal rainfalls we expect this year, we're not looking for major flooding. Can't say that it can happen, but at least the odds are not there for it. This is what everybody really wants to see, right? How many have already bought snow machines for the winter? New shovels. I'm actually curious, how many did buy new shovels this winter? Oh, ye of little faith. These are the snow years back to 1940 for the airport site. And I selected these years because these are the years we were in a warm neutral period, similar to what we're seeing this year. Notice the snowpack. 1960s winter, nothing. 1952, But then we got those great years, 03 to 04. We had one back in the 90s, 92, 93. Another one back in 1979, 1980 winter. All brought a good foot of snow to this region. So, neutral winter, looks like we're all over the place for possibilities. This is the winter snow signal for the INSO cycle. Similar to we saw the rainfall, these are the snowfall totals for the winter. Again, the far left bar is the typical winter snow totals for these four sites. Yellow is what we're in, the warm neutral. The only thing we can say is that we're probably, for Portland and Salem, even Eugene you could argue, odds are you're probably going to have near average snowfall. Astoria and the coastal areas, unfortunately, the signal is much more pronounced. I would not be betting on snow if you're on the coast this year. Notice you only get about 2 inches at average for these kind of winters in Astoria compared to a normal 5 that can fall out there. Portland, on the other hand, this kind of winter, on average is 6. Typical winter gives you about 6.5, so there's some encouraging snow information. Also include government camp for us. If you're going to be going to the mountains, looks like a good average winter, not too much different than we see out of a typical year. More snow than, probably a little less than last year, but more snow than we'd see in an El Nino year, of course. Recap the snowiest winters. I heard some of you here for the 50s. What about the 68, 69 storm? Anybody here? Any of you living in Eugene during that year?
One.
A couple of you. That was the great month. 4 feet of snow in January. Portland didn't quite fare as well. We had some good snows in January, but that was an El Nino year. Then you look at the next one, the December big storm of 08. That was a neutral year. La Nina, of course, in 1955 brought snow. So you can get some heavy snows. It's just all a magic question of whether you're going to get the cold air coming out of the gorge and sitting on us. Are we getting a storm coming at the same time? A lot of things have to come together, and that's why it's so much fun to try to forecast snow, and I try to make sure I'm on annual leave when it happens, because I don't want to be responsible. Again, I like fog. Fog is easy. We could also get shut out. Remember I showed you a couple of slides back that we had some winters in these cycles get nothing? Of our shutout years, 8 of them were El Ninos, some were neutrals, some very few were La Ninas. All over the place as far as what we get, but odds are still favoring snow for the winter coming. Here's the big question. 2-inch snowfall events. A little bit of a pattern again. We want to look for the neutral period. And I don't know, I don't like my mouse is gone. I'll point it out. We heard earlier about the PDO. We're on the negative side. So look from this side leftward. But we're also in a neutral period. So now we're going to look at this part of the slide upward. And that kind of pattern, do you see, actually, in that slide, do you see a pattern for that area? Not really. We do see a pattern. It seems like we get 2-inch snowfalls or better when we're below that period in those cooler La Nina patterns when the PDO is still negative. Then we said, well, let's look and see those great big snow events for Portland. Now we see a little bit of a pattern. Like people said earlier, the PDO negative side favors snowfall. This definitely proves that. But because of the INSO cycle, we don't really have a strong signal one way or the other. Because I'll tell you, this was the 1968 storm. Down here, either one of these, I forget which one it was the 2008 storm. It favors, it looks like we want to be in one of those two if you want to get a big snow event. But, like we saw on that slide earlier, anything can happen. So is there going to be a lot of rain or snow this winter? Certain indicators cannot be ignored. So our forecast for the Weather Service and NOAA, temperatures are going to wind up near average. There's some indication looking at the data that our nighttime temperatures may not be as cold as we expect, especially for the first half of the winter. And that's mainly because of increased cloud cover. We continue to see that on a regular basis every year. We get more cloudier nights than we do have had in the past. So temperatures, for the most part, near average. Can eliminate a cold snap from there and there, and like Steve said, maybe you would get one of those 9-degree nights. Doesn't look very likely though. Precipitation, probably near average or slightly drier. There's some possibilities that February could wind up being wetter than average. Snowfall potential, I can't tell you how many events we're going to have, but it looks like we've got a load of moderate potential, especially beginning of January and February. And the one thing I kind of went back and looked at is look at how many of those were actually snow events. It appears that we actually have a better threat for those mixed events, where you get that 2, 3, 4 inches of snow, it kind of gets a little rain on it, and then we get that 2, 3 inches of sleet and mixed throttle, freezing rain, the stuff that all the drivers like to have and sends the frenzy into all the media. Maybe we get accurate, or what's the Weather Channel now? Maybe there'll be one of those events where they're out there at the gorge waiting.
Maybe they'll name it.
So we'll get some snow, but don't be surprised if it's more sleet and ice and snow mixture instead of those pure snow events like we saw back in 2008. Just to give you an example, that 2003, 2004, that last warm neutral year, how many were here in January of that year? Remember what happened out at the airport? We had flights canceled, of course, but we had that 2 inches of snow, and then you had 2 inches of sleet on top of it, and we had all the trucks they had out there plowing the runways in a nice little line going through there. That could be what we're going to see again this year. However, bottom line, weather in these INSO neutral years is so highly variable. Will we be shut in due to all the heavy snow come January and February, or are we going to get shut out again? We shall see. Like I say, Mother Nature hasn't given her card indications to us yet, so we're just going to have to wait and see.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Clint Rockey from the National Weather Service.